Let's begin.
Burn, ungodly filth!
What do you want? To make you ours or to make you despair?
Spirit Blade Productions presents...
Did you have any idea how much I will make you suffer? The horrific agony that I will inflict.
Spirit Blade, Dark Ritual.
Hell will be a refuge for you when I'm finished. For more information, visit spiritblade.com. Rejoice, ye penny-pinching nerds! Rejoice! For this is a season unbound by our bank accounts, unfettered by fees. A legendary age of liberty. This is the summer of free! Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. We're back into the summer of free this time around, and I want to actually highlight and kind of do an abbreviated review of a movie and a video game that I think are worth checking out, that I've definitely enjoyed. The movie that I want to highlight this time around is Cube. This one was released way back in 1997 and spawned 2 sequels. You can watch Cube at voodoo.com, VUDU.com, as well as tubitv.com, TUBITV.com, where you can also watch the sequels Cube 2 Hypercube and Cube Zero. The synopsis given on IMDb for the original Cube is 6 complete strangers of widely varying personality characteristics are involuntarily placed in an endless maze containing deadly traps. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's a formula we've seen modified and used again and again, I think in a number of movies, but Cube was one of the first ones that I can remember using that formula, especially with any kind of like a sci-fi or technological kind of vibe to it. This is a sci-fi slash suspense slash horror movie. Horror not in the sense of like, you know, monsters and stuff, but horror more in the sense of like people die in terrible, terrible ways. Now that premise might seem kind of formulaic, and I think that's because it helped define the modern version of this formula, you know, where one or more people find themselves in a sort of deadly alien environment prepared by some unknown enemy. They're getting picked off one by one before clearly presenting a strong stereotype of some kind. The dialogue and personality types in Cube, as I watch it now, feel very unnatural and overstated to me. I don't think they did at the time. I think part of that is because at the time it came out, I saw it maybe just a couple years after it was released, I think. And at the time it didn't seem that way. I think there weren't as many indie sci-fi movies being made of this kind of quality. If you watch it now, I think it still kind of looks like almost like a TV movie or a long TV episode that would have been produced around that same time. But I mean, around, you know, like the late 90s, there wasn't even much sci-fi that was of, you know, TV budget quality in terms of the visuals, you know. So I think if you go in now with those kinds of expectations of, okay, this is going to be like a 90-minute TV episode of pretty solid sci-fi from the, you know, mid to late 90s. I think if you go in with those expectations, then I think there's definitely some things to appreciate here. The predicament, to me, is still an interesting one, so I still enjoyed my viewing of the movie as I watched it again. I still enjoyed the tension as they entered each new room and trying to figure out, does this one have traps in it? You know, what is the secret to survive and try to escape this strange cube structure? Having seen it already, I do have to say that it was better in my memory than it was this time around when I just watched it again. But if it had been my first time watching it, I think I still would have endured the script, which specifically the dialogue was rubbing me the wrong way, you know, and the performances, which I'll get to in a minute. I think I would have endured that to see the suspenseful puzzle through to the end and see who was going to survive and stuff like that. It's also worth watching, I think, as a sort of precursor and likely inspiration to like the Saw film series, and there's probably one or two other movies that I can't bring to mind right now that certainly borrow from this kind of formula. And Saw, as you may or may not know, also combined deadly trap environments and kind of morality lessons with these strongly stated character stereotypes thrown into the mix. So you can kind of get a sense of where a lot of those kinds of movies took their inspiration from. Certainly there were other, I think there's like maybe one or more Hitchcock movies that had done this thing before, but I mean the modern kind of like resurgence of this kind of story, I think owes a good amount to Cube, so definitely worth checking out. The cast might also be of note to you. I'm gonna probably mispronounce her name, but Nicole DeBoer. She was on Deep Space Nine, you may know her from that, and she was like the second Dax. There was Jadzia, or Jadzia, I think it's Jadzia Dax, and then that actress went on to, I guess, be in a Ted Danson comedy or something. She stopped being on Deep Space Nine. They replaced the actress and kind of the character as well with this younger host for the symbiote, and her, I can't remember what her name was, but anyway, this is her. She also, I believe, was the kind of like the romantic interest in the Dead Zone TV series after this, so she'll probably have a familiar face to you if you've checked out either of those shows. And then the other familiar face maybe to you would be David Hewlett, who was in Stargate Atlantis, would be my guess, is what he's most well known for now. Hewlett was actually the best part for me in my rewatching of it. I don't think he stood out to me when I watched it for the first time way back when, but this time around he stood out to me, and I think it's because performance styles have changed in movies and in this kind of movie over the years to be more dramatic and more understated, or I don't. Maybe I shouldn't say that they've changed, but there's been more of that kind of acting that's been brought to sci-fi, more kind of like serious and weighted. If you think of a show like Battlestar Galactica, where they had this sci-fi environment, and yet they were having these actors really do some serious, heavy drama type stuff. And before that kind of thing was happening in sci-fi movies and television, there was some kind of like overacting that was more common in science fiction, and I think that's kind of what I'm feeling here that's kind of grating on me a little bit. I'm not saying that the actors were bad. I actually think this is a stylistic thing that they were either going for, or it was just the norm of the day. But the performances to me felt a bit overdone, as though the actors were doing a stage play, and I think it would have felt right to me in that setting, but the style was a big distraction for me here in this view through, especially when it comes to the main quote-unquote villain of the story, who's bulging wide eyes and constantly dramatic. Almost, I'm wondering if he has a background in mime. He was in the RoboCop Prime Directives TV, miniseries, in which he eventually played someone who had been put through the RoboCop process and stuff, and so he almost, I could see some of those kind of like smooth, robotic, and very strongly stated motions in kind of like the way he used his body. I could see some of that here, and it felt overstated. It felt like too much. So the performances I had a little bit of trouble with in this one. But again, David Hewlett stood out to me because he was understated. He was the one guy that was like, and he had a defeatist attitude, so he's kind of like, down and laid back and low energy, and it's just like, guys, we're not going to make it out of here, but he kind of starts to emerge as a core character in this ensemble cast, and so it was nice to have him in so much of the movie. Let's see here. As far as the visuals go, this is one reason I really still appreciate this movie. The visual look of the movie is a big selling point for me. The shooting, just from like, if you're into like how movies are made and can appreciate when people take a small budget and do a lot with it, then I think this movie's definitely worth watching. The shooting style does dip into artistic angles more than I would prefer, but they at least help to make the movie kind of striking and varied as they needed to, I think, because there's basically one single set that is used to represent multiple rooms from beginning to end. Each room is a cube shape, and it's part of a larger cube structure made of a whole bunch of cubes that connect to each other. other, cube rooms that connect to each other. So they're trying to find their way out of this massive cube with cubes within a cube, structure. And so they're using the same set to represent every single one of these rooms, with only the color of the lights changing, basically, to differentiate one cube-shaped room from another. The simplistic set is so impressively used that I totally bought into the idea of the characters moving through numerous identical rooms in the same giant cube-like structure. So that was really cool. Let's see. The score is sparse, but it has a creepy human-produced quality to it. They use human noises, human whisperings and stuff like that gives it a unique and memorable vibe to it, I think. As far as memorable themes that might bring out worthwhile moral, philosophical, or spiritual thinking, that might trigger some worthwhile thought here, the usual morality plays are present that you would see in a movie that uses this formula. This character's greedy, this one's a snob, this one's abusive, this one is innocent, this one's complacent. I've seen so many horror movies that use character types this way that it just kind of went in one ear, out the other. But in one moment, as they talked about the nature of the cube structure and its origins and speculating on why this is here, who made it, it seemed clearly meant to represent the evils of the world that we collectively allow to get out of control, because we are just, each of us, fixated only on the limited space around us. And so we don't see this rising evil, this rising problem building up around us until it's too late and it becomes the death of us. The call to of the movie to its audience seems to be to kind of wake up and pay attention to the world around us, so that we don't allow evil to have its way, or so that we don't unwittingly contribute to that evil. I'm uncomfortably reminded of how little I actually put effort into staying aware of current events, and how content I am to merely stay informed about inconsequential things like what movies, games, or TV shows, are in the works, and just kind of justify my my neglect of staying informed in world events by, the obvious bias that we can find all over, in news outlets. I easily let that justify my neglect, and really I shouldn't. And so this message was, I think, a worthwhile one, and I honestly hope that it'll kind of stay with me and get me back to thinking about current events and how I can be more aware of them. It's rated R for some strong violence, sci-fi violence, gore, and language. All right, so those are my thoughts on the movie that I would highlight for you. And again, Cube is available at vudu.com and tubitv.com, where you can also watch the sequels to Cube. All right, moving along here, I would want to highlight to you a video game called Flare, specifically the Empyrean campaign, which is spelled E-M-P-Y-R-E-A-N. E-M-P-Y-R-E-A-N. Flare. And you can find this at flarerpg.org. It's a completely free, open-source Diablo clone. It has visual fidelity that's on par with Diablo 1 or Diablo 2, but I would say lacking the same style and visual identity of those games. The combat is simple, with meaningful individual enemy encounters, which I appreciate, because starting with maybe Diablo 3, these dungeon crawling hack and slash Diablo clones, top-down action RPG type things, they tend to really rely on swarming enemies to make the game challenging or difficult or whatever. And I much prefer games like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance or Champions of Norath, where there are fewer enemies on screen at once, and those enemies are each by themselves a larger threat. And this, I'm not talking like Dark Souls, but somewhere in between. And so it's not Swarm the superhero in this game. It's less about quick thinking in the middle of a chaotic screen environment, and more about pressing your luck with resources. Like, okay, I have this many health potions, I have this much money. How much experience grinding can I get out of this run out in the forest or in the dungeon before I need to teleport back and get more healing potions and upgrade my equipment and stuff like that. When you die, you keep all of your equipment, but you lose half of your gold. Enemies respawn so that you can keep on doing that grind as much as you want. And looting, I felt, was satisfying without overwhelming you with crap that you're just going to be selling anyway. It uses a musical score and user interface elements that are clearly inspired by Diablo. So I mean, if you're looking for a game that has some of that kind of vibe for free, then go over to flare.org, and you probably have an option there to check out. You know, you can play a game like Path of Exile, and that's going to be a much better game in a ton of ways. But Flare doesn't even tempt you to spend money on cosmetics or inventory space, which arguably Path of Exile does, you know. So if you are looking for a completely safe option for a hack and slash game that will, you know, help you avoid any and all temptations to spend any kind of money, if you're just in a place where, like, I just need to be away from any kind of temptations to spend, I've got to be in a save mode right now, then I would definitely recommend checking out Flare. It also takes up far less space on your PC and demands almost nothing from your computer compared to a game like Path of Exile. Finally, there's an active mod community, and Flare is in large part intended as an open source tool for creating your own RPGs if you want to go that route. So if you're an aspiring game creator, Flare could be a great way for you to get your feet wet, or you could just use game creation as a summer hobby away from the heat that's easy on your pocketbook. The only real downside I've had with it is that now and then I have trouble making contact with enemies when I attack with the magic user class. I can be clicking right on the enemy, but if my body orientation is off, that seems to affect my ability to land a hit sometimes. I had much less trouble with that using the Ranger class with the bow and arrow, which also has a further range than the default spell attack, and I had almost no problems with that with the melee class, so I think that may be the best way to go. I forgot to mention about the classes, though. There are 3 different classes, you know, a magic user, like a ranger class, and a melee class. And it's not like an extensive skill tree for each of those classes, but enough that I can get out of it what I would want from a certain archetype. You know, the magic user has 2 different kinds of fire attack spells, 2 different kinds of ice attack spells, and 2 different kinds of lightning attack spells, and each one of those can be upgraded to become passively more powerful. And then there's also some, you know, other passive upgrades that you can get for that. The range class has, as you'd expect, ranged attack options, but also has like some trap options. So even though they don't have like a dedicated thief class or a dedicated assassin class, you can have a class that's going to be messing with the environment more and like doing things that will slow down your enemies, you know, and setting, you know, doing traps and stuff like that. So so you can get some of that itch scratched with the ranger class. And then, as you would guess, the melee class is just all about getting up in the enemies and, you know, doing all kinds of damage and, you know, stuff like that. So so I think that the class options are, you know, pretty good. They're not super complex, but I didn't find them to be too minimalistic to keep my interest either. One thing I noticed that I wasn't anticipating, you know, having anything to comment on is something going on thematically in this game. It's interesting to me how pervasive a works-based redemption is in entertainment. In other words, we talk about, you know, characters are always talking about, you know, having to redeem themselves, you know, like if some character goes south in some way, then, you know, they'll feel like they need to redeem themselves, like by sacrificing their lives, or someone else will say you need to, this could be your redemption, this could be the way you redeem yourself, or the character will say, I have to do this, I have to redeem myself, you know. There's all this kind of natural tendency in our minds to say that our redemption, that our forgiveness is something that we have to earn. And that's something that you're going to find in, I think, pretty much every world religion except for Christianity. The grace of God, the forgiveness, the unmerited favor of God is something that is just unique to Christianity. It's even in this tucked away game in the little corner of the internet, there's a story that requires the hero to earn his redemption through brave deeds of some kind, and then a ritual like involving, I think, his own blood or something. So it's everywhere, and I'm reminded that it can even steal its way into our minds as believers. Sometimes it can even make its way to our pulpits in our local churches, and all that, despite the fact that the message of the gospel is this tireless mercy and forgiveness for us, earned and provided by Jesus. So anyway, that was just a little point of interest to me. That's all I have to share this time around. That's a movie and a game that hopefully will help you kill some time without killing your pocketbook. Stay tuned for more Summer of Free. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
Let's begin.
Burn, ungodly filth!
What do you want? To make you ours or to make you despair?
Spirit Blade Productions presents
Do you have any idea how much I will make you suffer? The horrific agony that I will inflict.
Spirit Blade Dark Ritual.
Hell will be a refuge for you when I'm finished.
For more information, visit spiritblade.com.